The assembly hall at Hastinapura is full of men who know exactly what is happening and will not say so. Bhīṣma sits in his place of honor. Pitāmaha, grandfather of both clans, the man who gave up his own throne to protect his father's happiness. Droṇa is there, the preceptor who taught these very princes to hold a bow. Kripa is there. Dhṛtarāṣṭra, blind, sits listening to everything his blindness allows him to refuse to see. And into this room, dragged by her hair, in a single garment, in the condition of her menstrual period, comes Draupadi, Yajna-seni, born from a sacrificial fire, queen of Indraprastha, wife of 5 warriors, called Krishna for the darkness of her complexion, and Panchali for the kingdom she came from. She has not come willingly. Dushasana, second son of Dhṛtarāṣṭra, seized her by the hair and brought her here, and the elders watched him do it. This is the Dyuta Parva, the book of dice, nestled inside the Sabha Parva, the book of the assembly hall, the second of the 18 great Parvas of the Mahābhārata, attributed to Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. What happens in this hall is not a subplot. It is the hinge on which the entire epic turns, the moment scholars have described as the collapse of the Dwapara ethical order, the sowing of every seed that will bloom into the war at Kurukshetra. Before she is physically dragged in, Draupadi does something the epic records with meticulous care. She sends a messenger with a question. Not a plea, not a cry for help. A question, juridical, precise, aimed at the structural weakness in everything that is being done to her. The verse is recorded in the Sabha Parva, chapter 62 of Ganguly's translation, corresponding to Adhyaya 61 of the Bori critical edition. Kimnu purvam parajai shihi, atmanam mamnu Bharata. Whom did you lose first, O Bharata? Yourself or me? The logic is exact. Yudhishthira had staked and lost his kingdom, his brothers, himself, and only then, in the 20th round, Draupadi. If he had already lost himself, if he was already a slave when he placed that final bet, then he possessed nothing. A man who owns nothing cannot wager another person. The bet is void. Her question is not rhetorical desperation. It is a legal argument, and it is unanswerable. Yudhishthira does not answer. The assembly does not answer. The question hangs in the hall like smoke, and the men sit inside it. This is what the Mahābhārata names dharma-saṃkaṭa, the dharmic dilemma, the crisis of righteousness in which every path forward violates something sacred. The elders cannot fight without breaking the laws of the guest relationship. They cannot speak without confronting the king who hosts them. Their silence is not indifference, the epic seems to suggest, but paralysis. And paralysis, the text makes clear, produces the same result as indifference. The bounded order of propriety that governs how queens are treated, how women are addressed, how suppliants in a royal hall are answered, all of it collapses, and the collapse happens quietly, in the stillness of seated men. One voice breaks that stillness. Vikarna, a Kaurava, a son of Dhṛtarāṣṭra, speaking against his own clan's interests, stands and tells the assembly what he regards as dharma. His argument, recorded in chapter 67 of Ganguly's translation, mirrors Draupadi's own. Yudhishthira was already lost when he staked her. He was deep in one of the 4 vices, gambling, urged on by deceitful players. Draupadi is the common wife of all 5 Pandavas. One man's wager cannot bind her. Vikarna concludes, I regard Draupadi as not one. He is a young man, the youngest of 100 brothers, and he knows the cost of what he is saying. Karna silences him immediately, and the attempt to disrobe Draupadi continues. Vidura had already protested. He told the assembly about the law and insisted the question must be answered. He was shouted down. 2 men spoke. Every other man stayed where he was. Bhima's rage, when it finally releases, is not directed at Dushasana alone. In chapter 67 of the Ganguly translation, Bhīma turns to Yudhishthira. He has accepted the loss of wealth, of kingdom, of himself and his brothers. All of it, he says, because Yudhishthira is their lord, and he is bound to that authority. But this act of staking Draupadi, he calls a highly improper act. This innocent girl deserved not this treatment. It is for her sake that his anger falls on Yudhishthira, not on the Kauravas alone. He vows to burn the hands that made that wager. The psychology of this moment is worth sitting with. Bhima's grief is enormous, but it has been formally suppressed. Suppressed by duty, by the hierarchy of brothers, by the structure of Kshatriya dharma that makes disobedience to an elder brother unthinkable. His shoka, his grief, turns to krodha, to wrath, only when the violation reaches Draupadi. Something about her suffering unlocks what his own suffering could not. The epic understands this. It does not explain it. It simply records the sequence. Shoka, that is the first Sanskrit key. The word means brief, sorrow, lamentation, and it covers the effective register in which Draupadi exists from this moment through the entire Vanaparva, the 12 years in the forest. But scholars of the epic are careful to distinguish Draupadi's shoka from vishada, the existential paralysis that overtakes Arjuna at Kurukshetra. Draupadi does not freeze. Her grief is agentive. It moves. It insists. It frames legal questions and sends them into rooms full of silent kings. And it accumulates alongside krodha, anger, in a tension the Vanaparva examines at length. In those forest years, Draupadi presses Yudhishthira repeatedly to act, to seek vengeance, to refuse the passivity that cost them everything. Yudhishthira counsels akrodha, the virtue of non-anger. Their debate is one of the most philosophically dense in the entire text, whether anger is always adharmic, or whether there exists a righteous krodha, a wrath that is itself dharma, when wielded in response to genuine injustice. Draupadi's position is not simply emotional. She invokes niyati, fate, necessity, the ordained order, not as resignation, but as recognition that the destruction of those who wronged her may itself be woven into the structure of things. Her only stated hope, the text records, is that Dharma should not desert the Kauravas entirely. Not that she forgives them, but that she trusts the moral architecture of the cosmos to require an accounting. There is a further tension woven through her identity that the text refuses to resolve cleanly. Draupadi is bound by pativrata dharma, the duty of the devoted wife, loyalty to her husbands, protection of their honor, care for the integrity of the household she holds together. She is simultaneously a kshatriya woman, which carries its own obligation, to resist injustice, to refuse degradation, to hold the line of maryada. In the sabha, these two dharmas break against each other. Compliance would fulfill one. Her legal challenge fulfills the other. She does not choose. She holds both, unresolved, and the holding of them is itself a form of suffering the text does not minimize. The intellectual Draupadi is a detail the epic insists on. The Vanaparva refers to her as pandita, a term of scholarly distinction. Yudhishthira himself, in that text, praises her rhetorical capacity, her ability to marshal itihasa and Purana as evidence, her logical precision. The woman in the assembly hall is not simply a victim of other people's decisions. She is the most articulate person in the room, addressing an assembly that has chosen not to hear her. Dhṛtarāṣṭra, years later, will acknowledge this, in a lament recorded in the framing of the Udyoga Parva. Yada shrausam Draupadim ashru kantim. When I heard that Draupadi, tears in her throat, had been dragged into the assembly hall grieving, in a single garment, while her protectors stood by as though she had no protectors. Tada nasham se vijaya sanjaya. Then, Sanjaya, I knew we had lost. The old blind king, the man who arranged the game and then arranged not to see it, acknowledges the turning point. He says it to his charioteer in private, which is perhaps the only place he has ever been honest. There is a particular kind of silence that is not the absence of words, but the presence of something larger than words can manage. A woman in her late 40s, sitting across from a sister she has not spoken to in 3 years following their mother's death. Not because there is nothing to say, but because what happened at the hospital, what was said and not said in those last weeks, has no available form. She has rehearsed it many times. She has written it and deleted it. The silence is not forgiveness and not anger. It is the shape grief takes when the assembly of people who should have spoken didn't, and what was left behind is a question no one answered. Draupadi's question, whom did you lose first, is that kind of question. A kind that remains grammatically unanswered long after it has been morally answered by everyone's behavior. What Bhīṣma's silence names, what Droṇa's stillness enables, what Yudhishthira's paralysis creates, this is Maryada collapsing, not through violence alone, but through the withdrawal of voice. Dushasana's hands do the physical act. But the hall full of seated men, their silence compounding with each passing moment, is the architecture that permits it. What to carry forward into your actual day. When someone in your presence asks a question that the room has decided not to answer, the decision not to speak is itself a choice with weight. The Mahābhārata does not ask its readers to be heroes. It asks them to notice which assembly they are sitting in, and what their silence is making possible. Grief remembered is not grief dissolved.